first off, I just want to congratulate you both on this beautifully bold and tender film. I loved every minute of it. So thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, so the zookeeper says to the patients, would you rather be a beast driven by its needs or human driven by its kindness? Natalie, why was it important for you as a filmmaker to explore the hypocrisies of human behavior and the harmful mistreatments of people who don't fit into society's definition of normal?
Yeah, it's just I thought, it's obviously, like, for me, the bigger question is the question of like identity and what defines us. And and I think within that question, there are so many different outlets in this film, because of course we have George's character who really deeply feels that he's a wolf, but we also have Lily's character who doesn't really feel that she's a wildcat, but feels the need to be that person because it's a way of been in which she's handled like trauma and survived effectively. And then, I think ultimately all of that kind of within the prism of the institution is just becomes like a reflection on society and our way that we handle ultimately things that we can't understand, facets of humanity, which we're constantly trying to sort of boil down into like a narration or into kind of a syndrome and a cure. And which is, I think, we ever more have that tendency, even when we think we're helping, and often it isn't the case. And I think that that's really what this film wants to address and highlight, as we even through, things which are some like beneficial, like therapy, they can be completely misused if they're seen in a two-dimensional perspective. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. There were just so many. This was every bit as I was watching it, I was reflecting upon, perception of the world, our perception as humans to what we don't understand. And Lily Rose, how have the humiliation and intimidation tactics that Wildcat, in witnesses, kind of shaped her to sort of live her life out of fear? And how does that impact her decision making throughout the film?
I mean, I think Wildcat's experience at the clinic is very different than all of the other patients, in that she's been there since she was a little girl, and she's kind of watched all of these different patients come and go and come and go. And, throughout the years, she has grown up, but she hasn't really evolved because she hasn't been given those tools, by the doctors and the people around her to feel like she has the skill set to survive in the outside world as an independent person. So I think that the point at which we meet her in the film, she's kind of questioning a lot of things about her existence and her place in the world, whether or not she has a place in the world, whether or not outside the clinic, there's a safe space that she can occupy out there. And I very much think that she's a character, like a person that's driven by fear of the unknown, fear of, of things that she's suffered through before. And I think that when she meets Jacob and sees this kind of like, very genuine, very truthful wildness in him, she's fascinated by that kind of, by that quality that I think she doesn't have in herself, and maybe even would like to have.
Yeah. And it's, even though Jacob is primal at moments, his heart is so pure. He like really leads with kindness, which I think is another thing that attracts them together, which is so beautiful. And this idea of acceptance, I think, which is explored throughout the film. And, how does acceptance play a key role in their relationship and in the love that they have for each other?
I mean, I think that they have this communication that's almost kind of wordless. And I know like Nat and I and George talked a lot about this when we were filming, that like, animals have this like communication that is completely nonverbal, obviously, because they're animals. And so they have this like way of communication that's totally like just based on energy. And that's something that George and I tried to create between the two of us, so that it's like, almost with just like a look, we could communicate how we were feeling. And I think also that, there's certain connections in life that happens that like, trying to put words to describe them would almost like cheapen them or something. I think that they have a connection that is very, very primal and almost indescribable. And they just meet at a point in both of their lives where they really, they really need each other on each other's paths. And they both kind of serve as a catalyst, I think, to a lot of self discovery.
Yeah. And I think that like, I feel like when people often ask like, what is love? Like, how does love feel? And I feel like like what you said, sometimes it's not as best described in words, but that energy, that exchange of energy and the physicality. Oh my gosh, you and George in that scene where you're both sort of like circling each other and was just, oh my gosh, it was amazing. I mean, I could, oh my gosh. Natalie, you talked about this a little bit in the beginning of the chat, but the film ends on such a powerful note. It's not about surviving, it's about surviving as me, which is such a discovery that he has, through the help of Wildcat. Lily, Rose, what you were just kind of saying. Can you just shed a little more light on the importance of identity and the value of living as one's true self?
Yeah, I mean, I think the film has, like, for me, the way I sort of constructed it was like I wanted to sort of question identity like as a whole. And obviously we're under this like umbrella of species dysphoria, sort of taken out of, let's say, real life context and what it means, and into a more metaphorical space. And so, on the one hand, I wanted to question through characters like Wildcat and also the other patients what it means to like choose your identity. And so in a sense, I found it quite interesting to think of like, well, if someone has decided that they're going to be, a German Shepherd, for example, like what might in their life might have led them to make those choices? Like, like why do they have such a need to create an identity for themselves? Are they lost? Are they, do they want to reconnect with a more animal instinct? Like, are they extremely lonely? Without answering those things necessarily, but kind of raising them and raising that side of identity. And then to sort of mirror that and offer obviously what is then ultimately like the core of the film, but lives in like cohabits with these other questions, is one character who actually deeply inexplicably just feels that he is that. And I think it was the duality of those two things that I really wanted to question, because also at the end, like, yes, I think we do want him to escape, and we do want him to certainly like be himself, because we've seen the consequences of that. But at the same time, like Lily, Wildcat, not Lily, sorry, is right when she says like, what life will we have? What life will he have out there? Like, how can he exist as a human wolf in nature? Will he have regrets? Like, will he miss, the side of him, which is a boy and he's left behind? So I think while like ultimately, like I of course have a very strong standpoint against like institutionalization and repression, I also still wanted to leave the questions open that aren't as simple, and aren't as answerable, and that everything comes at a cost, and you always leave a part of yourself in any choice that you make.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, and he's so tormented too. I mean, it's like you see that he wants to change because he feels like that's the right thing to do, but yet is completely contradictory to what his heart is telling him and he truly believes he is, which I think is very relatable. Not everyone thinks they're a wolf, obviously, but it's so relatable on so many levels.
I have to say also something that I think is so special about about Jacob's story is that, like, we meet his family in the movie, and he has these like really lovely, nice parents who love him and support him and care for him and want to get better and want to play an active role in him leading a happy and healthy life. And so we see that he doesn't come from like a terrible, like a really traumatic, like fucked up family or something. And I think it's important to show that being quote unquote like different or otherness in general doesn't have to always stem from trauma, and sometimes it does, and for Wildcat it does, but I think it's important that we represent in the movie that it doesn't always have to come from that, and you don't have to always otherness doesn't always have to be a direct answer to trauma. It can also just be the way that you are, and that's okay too.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, that's the beautiful complexity of this film. And it's like, yeah, I mean, love and being understood can be very different things sometimes, depending on the situation.
And love itself, as we said, there's so many different forms of it. And like those two characters are so lonely and so need to share like a connection, like a warmth, even if only for a moment. But so it was like a constant. I think, that scene with them on the roof just mirrors their relationship so well, of them coming close, but ultimately like there is a divide, there is like, they are just two completely opposite sides really of the coin of, love and compatibility. Yeah.
Saying that earlier, that thing that you had said a couple times, so it's when we were on set, like that ultimately like they have this inherent really strong connection, but it's almost like they're always looking at each other through like a glass window or something, because there's that like inherent impossibility to their love story, which is rooted in so many different things, but that's like, ultimately is the heartbreaking part of it all.
So good. Last but not least, I would just love to surprise you about yourself that you discovered on this journey.
I think it taught me a lot. Like, I don't know if it was like a revelation about like, oh, I'm this way or something, but I think it was more, it gave me really like the gift of freedom and of, like dropping my, like, I don't know. I think, and I was talking about this a little bit earlier, but like, I wasn't expecting the physical preparation, both with like, Nat and George, and also just like on my own, but with our movement coach, Terry Notary, who's incredible. I wasn't expecting the work to be as vulnerable emotionally as it was. And I think like seeing how the physical preparation and the emotional preparation kind of went hand in hand informed a lot about my performance, and I think George's performance as well, and our dynamic together. And I think it just taught me a lot about how, I don't know, like to lead with to lead with like courage, and with and just to kind of leave any sort of fear or any self-consciousness at the door when I take projects on in the future. Like it was the most kind of free and creative that I've honestly ever felt in my career, like up until that point. And so I think it just taught me to lead with fearlessness as much as I could, because that is what made me feel the most connected to my character, is just like leaving all of that at the door. And I think all of that obviously is aided by being surrounded by such good company that made me feel so safe to create in such a safe and loving space. But yeah, I think just like I really moved forward with like, I can just let it all go sometimes.
That's lovely. It's lovely.
Yeah. I guess I think it's like it's a bit harder for me to maybe like answer that in terms of like what I've learned about myself, because I think just tricky, I guess, to even analyze like where how the film like touches like me on a more personal level. But what I will say in terms of just like from directed like growth as like a director and as a creative, I think what I'd say that's quite similar to Lily is that I think there was like an element of like obviously like fear coming into this project, because it felt so novel, so challenging, and like the eternal question of like, how is this going to work out, like will it work, like and despite having like completely committed actors, you're always terrified, like and they put so much faith in you, and you're just like, are people going to buy it? So I think I think, previously in my first film, like it was a much more like, let's say controlled, smaller, but also just more controlled preparation of things. And what was fascinating was to see that, in fact, if you kind of like, as Lily was saying, like let go of your preconceptions and sort of like actually trust the process of like working with movement, with the actors, like so intensely without knowing necessarily all the answers, and like giving yourself room to be surprised by things, and there were discoveries that, Lily and I made, or that like George and I made, or that the both of them made together throughout the process, that completely changed the film. Like her take on when they're in the cage together and they have like, that scene was like, it turned into something like very, very different. Or, you know, the last scene of the film, George, you know, was like, no, there, I shouldn't be speaking so much. I've already let go of my boy self, you know, which then really changed things. Because then Lily, like Wildcat, was able, like with him pulling as a wolf so much and going to the forest, to be so desperate to hold him back. And it just completely changed things. So again, I think probably like, you know, just with every film, and particularly one like this, which pushes you into such an uncomfortable space, you just learn to let go and to trust and to just try things. And it's the cliche, isn't it, to like be brave, but you know, there's truth to cliches.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. Oh, well, like I said, I loved every minute of it. Thank you so much. Y'all created beautiful art together, and I hope you keep collaborating.